If they knew the price she paid, they would never speak of immortality again. The village of Elethis was known for its serene beauty, nestled in the foothills of ancient mountains that once housed the gods. But it wasn't the natural beauty or the sacred shrines that drew whispers from neighboring lands. It was the legend of Seraphina, the woman who never aged. For decades, she had walked among the people, her beauty unchanging, her youth eternal. Mothers told their daughters tales of how she had danced with kings and warlords centuries ago. Yet here she was, as radiant as ever. Her eyes, sharp and green as emeralds, carried secrets older than the earth itself. Seraphina was a legend in the flesh, but few dared to question how she remained untouched by time. Once a year, as the full moon hung high in the sky, Seraphina would vanish from Elethis, disappearing without a word. Some believed she traveled to distant lands, visiting the courts of hidden kingdoms. Others whispered darker things, much darker. One young man, Adriel, had been obsessed with her for as long as he could remember. He had grown up hearing stories of her everlasting beauty, how she never seemed to grow old, how she seemed to hold powers no mortal should possess. His father used to tell him, "There's a curse in that beauty, boy. Beauty that never fades has a price." But Adriel didn't believe in curses. He believed in secrets, and Seraphina was the greatest secret of all. For years, he watched her from afar, waiting for the night she would disappear again. When it finally came, he was ready. It was a moonless night, eerily quiet, when Seraphina slipped away from the village and into the dense forest. Cloaked in a robe of deep indigo, she moved like a shadow, her steps light and silent. Adriel followed at a distance, heart pounding, every fiber of his being screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't. The truth was too close now. For hours they walked, deeper into the forest than Adriel had ever ventured. The trees grew twisted and ancient, their branches clawing at the sky. Then, suddenly, Seraphina stopped. In the clearing ahead, an ancient stone circle stood, weathered and cracked, bathed in the faint glow of starlight. The stones hummed with an energy that made Adriel's skin crawl. He had found her altar. He watched, breath held, as Seraphina approached the altar. From beneath her cloak, she drew a small, ornate dagger, its blade shimmering with a faint blue light. Slowly, methodically, she began to chant in a language Adriel didn't recognize, a tongue so old it seemed to predate the world itself. With a swift motion, she cut a thin line across her palm, letting her blood drip onto the stones. The ground trembled. As her blood soaked into the altar, the air around her began to shift, darkening. Shadows twisted and coiled, forming shapes, inhuman shapes. They gathered around Seraphina, whispering in voices too soft to understand. But Adriel could feel their hunger. They weren't spirits. They were something much older, much darker. Seraphina's voice grew louder, more commanding. Her eyes glowed with a fierce light as she spoke directly to the shadowy figures. "I have kept my end of the bargain," she said, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "Another year for another drop of my blood." The shadows hissed in unison, retreating slightly. But one of them stepped forward, a figure taller than the rest, its form more solid, more menacing. "The blood is no longer enough," it rasped. "You have lived far beyond the years promised to you. Your soul grows weaker. The balance must be maintained." Seraphina hesitated, her face momentarily flickering with fear. "What do you want?" she demanded. The shadow smiled. "We want the boy." Adriel's heart froze. He had been watching, hidden behind the trees, certain he was safe in the darkness. But the shadow had known he was there all along. Slowly, It turned its featureless face toward him. Seraphina's eyes followed, locking onto his. "No," she whispered, her voice suddenly fragile. "He knows nothing. He's innocent." The shadow chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Adriel's spine. "Innocence means nothing to us," it said. "The boy must die, or your soul will be forfeit. The pact must be fulfilled." Seraphina's face twisted in anguish. For centuries, she had maintained her beauty, her immortality, by feeding the shadows with her own blood. But now, they demanded more. They demanded a life, and Adriel had been chosen. She stepped forward, raising her hand as if to shield him. "Take me instead," she pleaded. "I'll give you my soul. Just leave him." The shadow paused, considering. "You would give up eternity for this boy?" Seraphina's eyes softened. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, human. "Yes," she whispered, "I would." The shadow seemed to contemplate her words, but then it spoke, its voice colder than the grave. "You cannot bargain with us anymore, Seraphina. You knew the cost. The boy will die, or you will both be taken." Adriel couldn't breathe. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a vice. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. He was trapped in the middle of a nightmare that he didn't understand. Seraphina turned to him, her eyes filled with a sorrow deeper than words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "This was never meant for you. I thought I could keep you safe, but I was wrong." Before he could react, she moved. Faster than he could see, she was at his side, her hands on his face, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "I will protect you," she whispered, "even if it costs me everything." With a swift motion, she pressed the dagger into his hand, guiding him to her chest. "Do it," she commanded. "Do it, and you will be free." Adriel's hand shook violently. I can't." "You must," she urged. "It's the only way." Tears streamed down her face as she forced his hand. With one final, agonizing push, Adriel plunged the dagger into her heart. The shadows screamed. The ground trembled as Seraphina fell to her knees, her life slipping away. The shadows swirled around her, enraged, but unable to claim her. She had made her choice, and the pact was broken. As the last of her breath left her, the forest grew silent. The shadows dissolved into the air, leaving nothing but the faint echo of their whispers behind. Adriel stood frozen, the dagger still in his hand, staring at the woman who had sacrificed everything to save him. Her body lay still, peaceful, her eternal beauty finally fading into the night. She had given him her life, but the cost was more than he could ever repay. "If only they knew," he whispered into the night, "what she did in the dark to gain immortality."